Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 24 of the anime series ClassicaLoid. Oh man, this was all kinds of intense. Talk about clash of the musiques. All of the ClassicaLoids bringing forth their music to try to quell and completely allay this Bach summarization, as I've dubbed it, the entire world falling under this mystical, magical spell of Bach's music amplified by the MitsuruLoid 2.0 robots, that Mitsuru had constructed, and she's crazy. She's obsessed. I mean, even having her own Bach-sama style wig with little hair bows in it and everything. It was insane. And I loved seeing all the ClassicaLoids coming together, at least for a time, to try to allay this, to try to quell it and put a stop to it. But it was really interesting because, of course, we pick up right where we left off with them realizing, Schubert is missing. And here he is returning to the manor house, Kanai's manor house, seemingly having fallen victim to this same spell. He's wearing the wig. He's speaking in that one note, music sort of themography, the way, they would conduct their music and construct it back in the day. It's so interesting because I had put forth the speculation, well, maybe he's just faking out the rest of the lemmings of Bacalites, if you will, making their way to the manor house. Maybe he's just faking them out to get his ass back there and reunite with the ClassicaLoids proper. But no, apparently, in fact, he had fallen victim to it because Beethoven walks over to him, pissed off, something fierce, and punches him right in the chops, sending him flying. It's almost like, playing air bowling ball, because he crashes into a whole slew of other Bacalites at the gates, and they go flying and everything like that. Even this cannot stop this process, unwind it, or put a cease to it. But at least Schubert then wakes up out of it, and they all get together. You have Liz, she had started saying, we have 7 ClassicaLoids that can, do something about this. And then she was interrupted by Schubert, being fashionably late, though he may have been, being brainwashed. And then when he's finally back in line, she starts all over again. We have 7 ClassicaLoids that can use their music to do something about this. And the next scene after the OP is literally them wreaking havoc, using a clash of musics, every single one of them, from the penguins to like the ghosts and all this kind of stuff, brainwashing, as far as Liz is concerned, for these people to almost like a truth serum, reveal the truths of their lives and everything. And it's just madcap madness. It's insanity. But they soon realize this is temporary. There's not really anything they can do to a lasting effect. And then Kanai's father calls and is like, Kanai, there's this big sort of machine, the Octavus. I tried to shut it down. I tried my best. It turns out I'm going to need you to go ahead and make a trip over there and do it for me. It's like, she's just incredulous. I'm like, gee, Daddy dearest, anyone? Thanks a lot, Dad, And so I was actually surprised that we split up the ClassicaLoids, but what was really interesting was the way it turned out, because they're playing rock, paper, scissors, or however they're doing it, like again and again and again and again. We don't see it. We just see Hashi sort of being ambivalent, watching this happen, the entirety of the rock, paper, scissors match going on off screen. But the winners of this turn out to be Beats and Motes, and that's really intriguing because they are the first 2 characters we really were debuted to as far as the ClassicaLoid side of things at the start of this series, and that kind of excited me. A lot of the aspects of this episode were hearkening back to the humble beginnings of this anime, referencing Kanai's grandmother again, actually seeing her reflecting back on seeing her anew thanks to the music and everything like that. It just really brought it back to zero, in a sense, brought it back to the start. And a lot of the aspects that were touched upon almost fully brought it full circle. I think by the end of the episode, I would say everything was brought full circle. But then, of course, extended for a completely mind-blowing revelation that I gotta say, man, it goes back to the synopsis I remember reading. The very first time I looked at the ClassicaLoid synopsis, I saw Beethoven was a part of it, I saw Mozart was a part of it, and that intrigued me, that sold me, I wanted to check this out. But there was mention of giant robots and aliens. 24 episodes did it take to say anything again about aliens. Mind blown. There are actually going to be aliens somehow in the interplay of this story. I saw that final shot. I was like, okay. Nice time for the other leg to drop. Going back to the synopsis I read months ago. I had completely forgotten about it. And then when they showed up at the end of this episode, I'm just like, oh crap, that's what I read. It had slipped my mind that there was ever any call to that. Interesting, too, that they would actually put that synopsis out there mentioning aliens that don't come until the end of the series. I don't know. But that just, again, blew my ever-loving mind. Like, you know, it seems to speak to an extended purpose of what Bach-sama was intending to do. A lot of, when Kanai, Beats, and Motes finally, you know, he transforms a truck a la Transformers. It looked like Ironhide from the original Generation 1 Transformers. This thing's hopping about the rooftops of the cityscape and everything like that, getting all the way over to where the octopus is at the base of this mountain. And of course, all the rest of the ClassicaLoids with Sosuke, where they're like, you can't do anything. Sit back and watch, you know. Basically, they're still going on with their music. They're still trying to protect the manor house. As I say, meanwhile, Kanai, Beats, and Motes are going to confront this machine, this, you know, musical dynamo that, unfortunately, at that point, Bach-sama is still very much a victim to himself. He's still clasped in there. But as they're making their way, I guess he calls forth his own music prowess once again, and he manages to sort of fluster the machine. He doesn't, you know, shut it down entirely, but he manages to free himself and the Mitsuruloid 2.0 robots. And this was mind-blowing because I had suspected it would take the ClassicaLoids all going there and you know, sort of rescuing him. But in fact, they recertify the fact that Bach-sama is the strongest of all the ClassicaLoids by showing him being able to do this himself. But then, of course, it takes an interesting turn because another sort of unexpected aspect of it for me was, you know, I thought Bach would be somewhat celebratory that he was freed, and he would be maybe dismissive or punishing to, you know, Mitsuru for what she had done. Again, the sort of perversion of his prowess, the perversion of his vision, and even wanting to kind of become Bach-sama herself, which is all kinds of twisted, down to that wig with the hair bows and everything. It's just like, it mystified me that it's almost premeditated, that she was, you know, 10 steps ahead of the game all along. This was her plan, but it's completely unwound by Bach. And he just sort of flicks her in the forehead as her punishment. But then going on to seek actually making good on what his vision has been all along. The idea of taking the homogenized studio-produced music and trying to wipe that away from the world, but then going a step further and trying to make music the universal language. I mean, that's what we refer to it as in our real world. We refer to it as that because music can bridge continental, societal, language divides of all, you know, makes and models, really. The same piece of music, especially one that doesn't have, you know, lyrics attached to it, but it can even be the case with lyrics. These pieces, these wondrous sounds can encapsulate so much emotion and so much imagination and so much heart and soul. People from completely different sides of our planet can hear the same piece of music and be so moved and find a common ground in their love and their passion for that. And this is kind of something that Bach-sama speciously thinks is wrong. You know, it's not enough. He wants to make it a language for all, the only language to be in existence for not only humankind, but for animals, for nature, all this kind of stuff. This will be the one sole way anyone, any human, any being, even aliens from above, from other worlds, would be able to communicate any longer. Now, on the one hand, idealistically, that would solve a lot of the world's problems for sure. If we could all communicate, if there wasn't that, you know, communicative divide the world over, and we could understand things on the same level, maybe we would be less disposed to fighting and less disposed to having wars and all this kind of stuff. Not necessarily in all cases, but I think it would push us leaps and bounds ahead of the game as far as attaining some level of peace. But we would also lose so much. We would lose so much of our souls, our heart and souls, our imaginations, our logical faculties, everything that is attached in any way, shape, or form to the human condition, to the passion that we feel. Joy, sadness can bring us back to music. Music can instill us with joy and sadness. It's a circle. And there's something to be said, as Kanai puts forth, reflecting back on her grandmother and the loss of her. She would celebrate some of her happiest moments with her granddaughter by playing these classical pieces of music. This is something she remembers very fondly about her grandmother. And I reflected back on my own passion for music. I mean, there are songs that immediately instill in me a memory of a particular time and place, or a memory of a person, or even if not attached to memories, I'm brought forth to this wondrous, imaginative world in my mind of emotion, and I can picture things, especially as a creator myself, as a writer, as a very imaginative, visually so kind of person. I can almost watch entire moviescapes in my mind when I hear certain pieces of music. Again, whether that fall back on memory, whether that just be the creative, artistic part of myself. I mean, everybody loves music in some estimation. There's so many different kinds of music, so many different genres, so many different styles. There's literally something for everybody. I have rarely heard anyone that I've ever encountered say they didn't like some type of music. Maybe one or two people in the history of my life have I ever heard there was no particular music they were that interested in. But I love Beethoven's supposition, calling back on the gyoza, that music is not just the musical melodies, the pieces that can sweep us away with this passion, with this imagination. Anything creative, anything that lights that fire in your soul. If you're standing over a stove and you're cooking a meal that you are transfixed by, you're lost in putting all the ingredients together and feeling just so robust about the creation of this process, in a sense, it's the musical notes coming together, colliding and creating something beautiful. And so music transcends just the sounds you hear on the radio, just the sounds on your phonograph, just the sounds of your CD player. Music, the emotion that it embodies, goes beyond all of that. It can be attributed to anything, to anyone and anything. And it was such a profound thing, and I'm so glad it was Beethoven who brought this forth. I mean, this whole episode, trying to quell Bach's Sama, trying to quell the octavus, was more on Bach's Sama's side, and putting Mitsuru in her place, which as I say, was a surprise. But I love that Beethoven was the clinch pin to bring all of this home. And really, it was down to him, as far as, by himself, taking Bach's Sama back a peg. The entire encounter about, again, calling back on their previous encounter where, the freedom to do these things and following your heart. You're mistaking that is Bach's Sama's, pointed accusation. You're mistaking this selfishness and this greediness for the ideas of freedom and following your own voice and everything like that. Finding your voice, following your heart. He's completely specious. He's discombobulated. He's not understanding things the way they really are. And herein we see just how evolved, as one of the characters pointed out, I think it was Mitsuru, they called forth different music when they had to go up against the Mitsuruloids that, in case of Beethoven and Mozart, they ran into their robot doppelgangers and they took them out with ease using music that we had not heard before, or if we had, Mitsuru had, and that kind of thing. They've evolved. I've touched on this time and again that, especially in the last handful of absurd episodes, each one of them, the sort of circular note that we would keep going back to was their evolution. They're growing beyond what they had once been. And for all of his power, it led me to think that Bach-sama is not so full-fledged evolved as he assumes himself to be. He may be the most powerful classicaloid, but his estimation of the world is unhinged. It doesn't match up with an actual evolution of mind, body, and soul as each of the other classicaloids has themselves experienced. And so it was very interesting to see the musiques clash once again, and this gigantic battle between Beats and Motes and Bach, and all of a sudden, to really put the cap on that bottle, Beethoven and Motes, they seem to transform. And I think Beethoven was the main focus of this transformation into a giant, almost sort of Digimon, Pokemon dragon. Gold-flecked though it may have been. They both had turned gold, and then they transformed into this giant dragon that completely ravaged Bach-sama. His glasses go crashing off his face, and the wig goes flying. And finally, he's brought back to a sense of reality as close as he can get. And I love how there was talk of Kanai being almost akin to being the conductor for the classicaloids. Again, touching upon that aspect of music and musique that isn't necessarily the sounds that we so love and cherish, the melodies we so love and cherish. Going beyond that, human association, whether that be familial connectivity to, romantic attraction, to loving your friends. I mean, there's something to be said all series long for Kanai being the central focus of keeping the classicaloids together, keeping them growing, keeping them evolving, even as absurd as they could be, even as sort of backward as they could be. She is the one who gave them a roof over their heads. She is the one who propelled them to seek beyond their selfish, very childish ways of being. And were it not for her, were it not for that manor house, maybe they would have been a lost cause all along. But in fact, have they propelled themselves so much further than even Bach-sama could ever have expected? Now, he says this is what his goal was. This is what he wanted. But again, as I just got done saying, his wants for the world are specious. They're discombobulated. He's coming at it from the entirely wrong direction. But then with the revelation, there be aliens here, I suddenly found myself wondering if this was somehow the secret, true desire that Bach-sama had in mind. Maybe it wasn't so much about corrupting and despecializing the music and the melodies of the world as he would thus do. But when we see that shot of this dragon form of Beethoven and Motes clashing with Bach-sama in those final moments of their battle, we pull back and we see the earth. There's almost like an energy field pulsating around the earth. And that shot of the earth reminded me of Genova from Final Fantasy VII, when you see that asteroid trying to clash down on the planet, and Sephiroth is trying to call it onto the earth to destroy it, wipe it out, that kind of thing. But when you see that energy field around the earth, suddenly I began to wonder, as soon as we see the aliens, was Bach-sama actually maybe trying to create a shell, a protectorate shell of energy around the earth, bringing forth a way to have all of humanity, all of the animals, all of the nature of our planet be its protector. If they all spoke the one language, they could move as a fluid machine against any potential otherworldly threats they might encounter, even if that seems unreasonable. But look at what show we're talking about. Aliens showed up by the end of the episode. And it seemed as though Bach-sama had perceived this was something coming. Now, why? Why would he know that? How would he know that? I'm not sure, but I put forth the speculation, could the classicaloids themselves be aliens? Could it be a case of E.T., the extraterrestrial, where he was left on Earth or had crashed to Earth by some means, and humanity finds him, a little boy finds him and tries to take him in and care for him, a la Kanai with the classicaloids. The government, in the case of E.T., would eventually get involved and try to ruin things, and eventually it would lead up to sending E.T. home, calling his people back and sending him on his way, saving his life. But could that be why these aliens are here now? Could Bach-sama have uncovered some hidden truth, whether hidden by Kanai's father or Mitsuru or whatever it is? Maybe Kanai's father found them and didn't necessarily create them, because we never get any explanation how he might have accomplished that. And he's always talking in riddles and running circles around you verbally. You can't take anything he says at face value, with the exception of what he said to Kanai, that you're a strong girl, you can do this in this episode. But it led me to wonder if somehow Bach-sama has come under the revelation and the realization that they are not from Earth themselves. That Kanai's father is basically lying when he said he created them. Maybe he, influenced their hybridization, to make them offshoots of the, composers of old. Maybe he somehow influenced that. But he could have found, these humanoid sort of, I don't know what you would even call it, when bugs go into hibernation, that kind of thing. Maybe he found something along those lines, alien forms that were humanoid, that he had to put in these incubator machines, and he would play music for each of them that would sort of make them become the embodiments of all these classical composers of old. I have no idea. I could be talking out of my ass completely with any of that. And then these aliens come back, maybe not so much to wreak havoc on the world, to enslave humanity, or any of these other sci-fi B-movie sort of story aesthetics you might come up with. Maybe they just want to come back and reclaim the ClassicaLoids that were lost to them. Or, alternatively, none of that could be the case. It could just be a case of, hey, alien invasion time out of the blue, and it's going to be the ClassicaLoids coming together to stop this and save the world. I really don't know. I almost had my breath caught in my throat during the battle between Beatsmotes and Bach-sama, because I thought they killed him at first. Until he sits up and he's speaking again, I thought maybe they killed him. But thankfully, that's not the case, and hopefully we will actually see them all banding together for the common purpose of, I guess, shooing away this alien invasion fleet that may or may not be here for that purpose. Again, this just blew my ever-loving mind. This episode absolutely captivated me and had me on the edge of my seat, and I was laughing and grinning and awestruck by so much of it. I loved the moment, by the way, when Beethoven is encountering his Mitsuruloid counterpart, doppelganger, and he brings forth the coffee. And he's like, he speaks in that sort of Japanglish, would you like a cup of coffee, or whatever, however he says it, and he gives it to the Mitsuruloid version of himself, who then drinks it and is like orgasming practically about how great the coffee is, until he then explodes internally because he isn't waterproof. The mentalities and the mind, the meticulous nature of all the things they implant into this series, speaks to me a love for everything from these classical composers, who they were in our real world, the musics and artistic creations that they brought forth for us that are so timeless, even this day and age, to all of these fun-loving anime and science fiction-y story tropes and genres and everything like that. I mean, there's a love for comedy, and the comedic timing is always pitch perfect. I couldn't get the episode playing right away. I had to start it over like 4 separate times to actually be able to sit through the entirety of the episode, watching on my mobile device. And every single time I started it again, and we got to that point where, Beethoven walks up to Schubert at the start of the episode and punches him and sends him flying, every single time I laughed heartily. It did not get old at all. And that's this series. The comedy, the humor, the absurdity, they managed to recreate and reinvent the wheel every frickin' episode, so that I'm dying laughing about something somewhere through the course of an episode. This one, of course, was much more, it dialed back a little bit on those comedic aspects, not entirely, but it was much more awing and majestic to me in how just crazy things had gotten, growing out of that internal mystery that started this series, what Kanai's father was doing. how he brought forth the ClassicaLoids, if he brought them forth, what Bach Sama was after. So much of this has now been answered, and the final sort of cherry on the cake is going to be an alien invasion, seemingly, whether they want their ClassicaLoids back or they want to enslave Earth and the ClassicaLoids have to clasp together to get them out of here, to send them packing. I don't know, but what a hell of a roller coaster ride, whirlwind of a series. I love it. I could not say that any more profoundly, how much I love this series. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you've seen episode 24 of ClassicaLoid as well, just what your reaction overall was to it. Love it or hate it, although I'd be highly surprised if anyone who would take the time to comment on this video would have anything other than elation for everything that they depicted in it. And, but yeah, anything goes in the comments below. Just love having that conversation. Otherwise, it'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.